Hey y'all, and welcome back to Flick Connection, where in less time than you normally spend scrolling for something to watch every night, I'm going to tell you about all the best stuff Prime Video has just added here in June 2024. Now we're already well past June 1st, so they've already added a ton of stuff, but some of my top picks include Brick. This is a really fantastic neo-noir flick starring Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and it's from writer-director Rian Johnson, who also did Looper with Joseph Gordon-Levitt. But more recently, he's done the Knives Out movies, and Brick has actually a lot in common with those. The big difference, though, is the language. Everyone speaks in kind of an interesting, poetic language in this movie, yet it's set in high school. It's high school students, so there's kind of a weird vibe and flavor that it puts out, making Brick a really unique watch. Speaking of Knives Out, we've got one of Daniel Craig's first big starring roles. Layer Cake was actually written and directed by Matthew Vaughn, who would go on to do big movies like Stardust and X-Men First Class, Kick-Ass, and The Kingsman. But before Layer Cake, he actually produced Guy Ritchie's first few movies, which were all fantastic gangster flicks. After that, he tackled Layer Cake, and he did it in a very different fashion than a Guy Ritchie movie. Yes, it's another English gangster movie, but Layer Cake looks and feels more like Michael Mann's Heat. It's slick and polished, and so are the characters, making it a lot different than a Guy Ritchie movie, yet it goes hand in hand with them really well.
Welcome to the Layer Cake, son.
Think about that.
Another one of my top picks for the month is the now classic movie Midnight Run. A comedy that holds up incredibly well. You've got Robert De Niro and Charles Grodin playing off each other in this fantastic way. De Niro plays a bounty hunter charged with bringing this white-collar criminal back in, and it turns into a road movie. They have to go across the country. It's fantastic stuff. Like I said, the humor holds up really well to multiple viewings. If you've seen it, then you know what I'm talking about, and if you haven't, it's one of my top recommendations for comedies this month, even though it too has some gangster movie themes. We've also got the Brian De Palma classic Blowout. Brian De Palma is most known for movies like Scarface and Carrie, and while Blowout is not nearly as well known, it is almost just as good as those classics. In fact, this feels a lot like a classic Alfred Hitchcock thriller. John Travolta actually plays a sound technician who records the sound of a car accident that ends up giving him a lot of clues to a potential crime. This movie's got conspiracy theory vibes mixed in as well, and I'm telling you, if you like classic Alfred Hitchcock style thrillers and you've never seen Blowout, it too makes one of my top recommendations for the month, in a month full of some great picks. Great picks like Ong Bak, one of the best martial arts movies ever made, mainly because they're doing a lot of real stunts in this movie, in camera, in slow motion. It looks amazing. If you like martial arts movies, this is a must watch. It too is highly rewatchable. For a throwback, they've got the original The Mechanic with Charles Bronson, one that admittedly jumps around from streaming service to streaming service, but I still love this movie.
Chicken licking is licking chicken.
They're also adding Bram Stoker's Dracula, which you could also call Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula. This is a movie that has grown on me over the years. It's got quite a few flaws that keep it from being just truly great, but there's also a lot of amazing elements like the sets and the costumes, and Gary Oldman's Dracula performance is just something to behold. They're also adding No Country for Old Men, easily one of the best looking movies they're adding all month. For a couple of underrated picks, they're adding The Last Castle, starring Robert Redford and James Gandolfini as the warden of this military prison. This one's pretty slow paced and even a bit old fashioned, but if you love Robert Redford, this one is a gem. And then Incendies is one of the first big movies from director Denis Villeneuve. He's gone on to direct Dune, Blade Runner 2049, Arrival, a whole slew of amazing movies, and Incendies is where it started. And we're still going with the stuff they've just added here at the beginning of the month. Some of my top science fiction picks include Predestination. This stars Ethan Hawke and Sarah Snook from Succession. Whew, that was harder to say than you would think. And this is from the Spierig brothers, who also did Daybreakers with Ethan Hawke. But Predestination is a much more thought-provoking movie. It actually revolves around time travel, and even though there are a lot of time travel movies out there, Predestination managed to tackle the subject in a very different way that I thought was not only new and interesting, but it just also happens to work really well cinematically. They're also adding Close Encounters of the Third Kind, one of my favorite alien invasion movies of all time. Yes, it's pretty long-winded, but I just love the fact that it's full of so much kind of fear, dread, and uncertainty, and then ends on such a unique note. Again, if you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about, but if you've somehow missed this over the years, or maybe you're one of my younger viewers, it's just incredible Steven Spielberg stuff that just nobody else is doing today for some reason, even though today seems like a great time for a movie like this to be released again. They're also adding Hackers and Johnny Mnemonic, two 90s classics that feel like they're from the 90s, but are a lot of fun to watch as a result. But speaking of aliens, I've got a bunch of new shirts over at DarrenVanDam.com. You can go check it out after the video or just scan this QR code. But the shirts are stupid soft. They do run a little bit small. They're a fitted design, so if you like shirts loose, definitely get a size up. The new designs include this meditating xenomorph. We also have a They Live design, which is my current favorite. It's a great way to support the show and look good while you're doing it. But I said something incorrect earlier. While I love Midnight Run, it's not the best comedy that they just added. I forgot. They just added Black Dynamite, one of my personal favorite comedies of all time.
I am declaring war on anybody who sells drugs in our community.
But Black Dynamite, I sell drugs to the community.
Now, yes, this is a movie lover's comedy. There's a lot of jokes about just low-budget movie making. In fact, the entire thing feels like a much lower budget effort than it actually was.
This is also true.
I find all of that stuff charming and hilarious, but also the humor in this is just absolutely stupid, and I love it. It's just a bunch of people having a really fun time making a movie.
What about the smile?
I am smiling.
Black Dynamite.
If you don't like silly or crude humor, then this is probably not going to be for you, but if you find that stuff hilarious, you're in luck. The movie's packed with it. Another black comedy I've not seen in ages, and I mean ages, and I grew up watching this movie, is Brewster's Millions. In fact, if I've seen one Richard Pryor movie the most, it's definitely Brewster's Millions. If you don't know this movie, he actually inherits a ton of money, but one of the stipulations is that he has to spend a ridiculous amount of money in order to earn it. So he's just trying to give away as much as possible. It's a premise Maya Rudolph is doing currently with the show Loot on Apple TV. Richard Pryor was doing it in the 80s, and it's just comedy gold.
I'm gonna start a collection of puddings and coupons that can be redeemed for frequent flyer miles.
That's insane.
Punch Drunk Love is another personal favorite of mine, but I understand why some people would hate this movie. If you cannot get into Paul Thomas Anderson's sense of humor with this flick, then it's gonna be a weird one that you're just not gonna understand. It's gonna leave you scratching your head. People that are able to get into this movie, though, tend to absolutely love it. Not only is Adam Sandler kind of brilliant in this movie, but Philip Seymour Hoffman has a couple of fantastic scenes in it as well. He's always amazing in Paul Thomas Anderson's movies. Some other top picks include Kindergarten Cop. It holds up better than you would think, and obviously so does Superbad. It's just one of the greatest of the 21st century so far. They are adding the unrated version, but don't really fall for that. It's got like 2 more minutes of dialogue in it, and they put all the best stuff in the original cut of the movie. Now, just recently on June 4th, they added the new 2024 version of Mean Girls. My understanding is this is not only a reboot of the original movie, but it's actually a musical, or it's close to a musical. Interestingly, they kind of hid the fact that it was a musical in the marketing, so if you're into musicals and you had no idea, that'll be a nice surprise for you this month. On June 12th, they're adding Black Mass, starring Johnny Depp. One of his last great performances, although I think we're going to see some great stuff from him again in the future. He plays Whitey Bulger in this movie, and even though I think The Departed was actually a better movie supposedly about Whitey Bulger. The performance Johnny Depp gives in this movie, as well as the supporting cast, is really fantastic. I actually think Black Mass pairs really nicely with one of his earlier movies, Donnie Brasco. There's kind of a nice balance with those movies, meaning Black Mass doesn't feel like a great movie like all around. It's kind of loose and a little bit messy, but seeing Johnny Depp do this is pretty fantastic.
Who wants a creamy, delicious milkshake?
But on June 13th, The Boys returns for season 4. This is easily one of Prime Video's most successful shows. They've got a handful that have done really well and had a bunch of seasons. This is one of their more popular ones, and it is a raunchy show. For a show about superheroes, I mean, this one appeals to a pretty broad demographic in the sense that people who love superhero content have a lot to enjoy, but also people who are tired of it. There's a lot to love with this show. It always goes over the top in kind of the best way possible and deals with some incredibly heavy themes at the same time. It's a surprisingly well-balanced show. On the 16th, they add a handful of movies I like. Anna Melissa, this is actually the only animated movie written and directed by Charlie Kaufman. If that name does not sound familiar, then this movie probably is not going to be for you, but if you typically like Charlie Kaufman's movies, this is one that just wasn't nearly as popular because of the animation style, but it is very Charlie Kaufman. Something that's far from Charlie Kaufman and also pretty far from Adam Sandler and Punch Drunk Love is Adam Sandler and Now I Pronounce You Chuck and Larry. A funny movie. I've always liked Adam Sandler's movies, and Kevin James, you throw him in the mix, then playing a couple of firefighters who are pretending to be gay. It's pretty funny stuff that, obviously would not get made today. At least I don't think so.
Oh, whoa. No, we're good. We'll take 2 looms, by the way.
Yeah, we're old-fashioned.
And they're also adding Joe Carnahan's The Gray. In this movie, Liam Neeson and a group of guys are stranded out in the wilderness after a plane crash where they're hunted down by ravenous gray wolves. I would put this right up there with any other great man versus nature movie. Movies like The Edge, I think The Gray is every bit as good. And it's really cinematic. Joe Carnahan's great at that. He's done some amazing movies. Movies like Smokin' Aces, The A-Team, and Narc. His movies always have a fantastic style and look to them, and they're always glued together really well, making for just fantastic storytelling. And then, the most overrated movie of 2023, Oppenheimer, gets added on June 18th. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm a huge Christopher Nolan fan, and I did like this movie quite a lot, actually, but it was pretty seriously overhyped, and not necessarily by people who saw the movie, but just by the Hollywood machine. They really kind of, I think, oversold what this movie was going to deliver in more ways than one. But for the type of movie that this is, a movie about a true story about a historical figure, Christopher Nolan turned that genre into like a summer blockbuster style of a movie. The marketing did that a little bit as well, but there's a lot to love with this movie. I also don't consider it to be really nearly as rewatchable as I hoped that this movie would have been, but it still makes for an amazing historical drama, and honestly, for movies of its kind, it genuinely is one of the best that's come out in a really long time. On the 20th, they're adding Federer, 12 Final Days. This is about the final 12 days of legendary tennis player Roger Federer's career, which apparently were some of the most amazing final days in anyone's sporting career. On the 25th, they're adding Whiskey Tango Foxtrot with Tina Fey and a new Celine Dion thing if you're somehow still into her. On the 26th, Robert De Niro makes a complete fool out of himself in Dirty Grandpa, the movie he really had no business doing. Zac Efron is kind of funny in this movie, but it's mainly just because he's acting against Robert De Niro, and it's just kind of weird. And then Aubrey Plaza kind of outshines the entire movie. She is just a wild woman, and honestly, if you've got a weak heart or anything like that, don't watch this movie. On the 30th, they're adding 13 Hours, The Secret Soldiers of Benghazi. Believe it or not, this is directed by Michael Bay. No, I'm not a Michael Bay hater, but he is famous for heavy CGI movies, Transformers. But 13 Hours is obviously based on a true story, and he directed the hell out of this thing. I mean, it goes a little bit too Hollywood, like he couldn't quite help himself, but barely. It's a pretty solid flick with some amazing sequences in it, and it's obviously a pretty harrowing story as well. Honestly, I'd love to see more stuff like this from Michael Bay in the future. Don't forget to go check out my shop, and don't forget the shirts do run a little bit big if you like yours loose, but I will keep making these videos as long as y'all keep watching them. Thanks for checking out this Prime Video episode, and you will see me on the next one.